pit, a criminal mastermind in Kaczynski against this hardworking and sometimes feeling a little bit out of his league, investigator.
Remember when John Douglas presented the case to us in the FBI Academy when we were new agents in training?
Has the nerve to take the word, if it's even true, of that serial bomber, serial killer.
Hello and welcome to Best Case, Worst Case. This is your host, Jim Clemente from Los Angeles, California, and my lovely co-host.
Hi, everybody. It's Francie Hakes calling in from the East Coast office of Best Case, Worst Case, otherwise known as Atlanta. Hi, Jim.
How you doing, Francie? Well, Francie and I are really excited because we have one of our favorite returning guests to Best Case, Worst Case, a longtime colleague and great friend.
Hey, Jim Fitzgerald here, and great to be on with you guys, Jim and Francie. You didn't call me lovely as you did Francie, Jim, but that's okay. I can get by with that.
All right. And where are you ringing in from?
Today, I'm ringing in from the South Jersey seashore. I can see the bay looking out my window, a few boats going by, about 50 degrees here. So no complaints. Kind of a warm day for January in South Jersey.
Well, as I said, we're really excited to have you, Fitz, and we will refer to you as Fitz so that people don't get confused between myself and yourself. So this has been a really exciting time in your life, hasn't it?
Well, on multiple levels, yes. But I certainly know today we're going to talk a little bit about Manhunt Unabomber, which, of course, aired back in August and September of 2017. But it's still staying very much alive around the planet Earth on Netflix and other streaming services, as well as now out on DVD. So I'm still doing media interviews. I'm still getting tweets and Facebook messages from people, and they're still ordering my book. So it's been a great 6 months, an interesting 6 months, which we can get into shortly, but really no complaints at all. The series got very good reviews, and I'm glad that it's still out there being watched all over the world by people in various countries.
And I know Jim won't toot his own horn, but certainly congratulations are in order to both of you, but also for our very own Jim Clemente for getting a nomination for Writers Guild of America Award for Manhunt. Jim, it is so exciting. Congratulations.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Well, obviously, I got the information from Jim Fitzgerald, and Tony Gittleson and I created the show, wrote the first pilot, and certainly we're very, very honored to have been nominated for this. It was a tremendous story. And Fitz, you lived it. You did it. You made it tremendous. So thank you for that.
Well, and Fitz, one of the things we've heard from our listeners about, and I'm going to try hard not to fangirl out just to be talking to Jim Fitzgerald. Sorry, no offense, Jim Clemente. But our listeners were so excited to have you on the first time, and they've been talking so much about Manhunt and how much they love the series. So I'm going to take the position of fangirl. It won't be hard for me. And I want you to tell us a little bit about what it was like to see and be a part of putting your life really on screen.
Yes, I remember, and actually I saw the first episode, which was about an hour and a half without commercials, at a red carpet event at the Lincoln Center in New York City back in late July. So watching it there with a live audience of about 300 people, including all the actors, the producers, the director, the writers, of course, it was really very surrealistic to watch a character playing me on the screen, a very large screen, by the way, and reliving a part of that life. And it's probably not too many people in this world have ever had this occasion to have a big time, professionally written, thanks to Jim Clemente, Tony Gittleson, and a few others, directed, acted, and produced everything else, and be able to see themselves on a big screen, small screen, whatever it is, and be able to relive, something that happened a year ago, 5 years ago, 20 years ago. In this case, it was about 20 years ago for me, and they did a great job. And it's, again, started with the teamwork of, quite frankly, Jim Clemente. It started with me and you back at the FBI Academy in 1987 that we kind of developed our team mentality. We took it to New York City where we solved a bunch of bank robberies and things like that, which I think we'll talk about later. And then lo and behold, profiling together, we both retire, and we wind up writing a script that gets made into a major TV miniseries. It doesn't get much better than that. So again, thanks to you. But yeah, watching the Fitz character be portrayed on the screen by Sam Worthington, who did an excellent job of capturing my essence, I think. It was quite awe-inspiring, and it was quite humbling, and it seems the rest of the general public liked it. Almost everybody. We can talk about a few people who didn't before long, and but on the whole, it was, and it still is a great experience.
So Fitz, you said it's surreal to see your life kind of portrayed on screen, but we promise our listeners to take them behind police lines. So can you tell us of some either interesting similarities or interesting differences in your real investigation of the Unabomber and the way it was portrayed on television?
Yeah, and I've been saying all along, Francie, that pretty much I think the show is about, the series is about in the 85 percentile of historical accuracy in terms of dates, names, places, how certain events transpired, what went on with the Fitz character in his UTF life as well as his personal life, and certainly what went on in the Unabombers and Kaczynski's life. They're one and the same person. I don't think we need to put that spoiler alert out there. But it more or less watching all that play out and watching it on weekly basis after the red carpet event and watching the subsequent episodes after that, it was a very interesting experience and eye opening. And a few times I would say to myself or whoever it is I'm sitting next to while watching it, oh, it didn't really happen that way, and I wish the writer kind of did that a little bit differently. But on the whole, I realized the concept of dramatic license and how they wanted to kind of frame the entire story, kind of pit a criminal mastermind in Kaczynski against this hardworking and sometimes feeling a little bit out of his league, investigator, profiler, FBI agent who kind of discovered the aspect of language as evidence along the way and never having realized it. And like in real life, the first time in San Francisco, I pronounced H2O as water. People kind of joked and made fun. Oh, you're from New York. I said, no, I'm actually from Philly, but that's a good point. And I've since then tried to pronounce it water like the rest of the country. But I'm very proud of my Philly roots. And I know there are still some dialect features that come out there. So the bottom line is, though, and to sum up what we're saying here, the writer, and Jim know this beforehand with Tony, the language evidence, the language analysis really played a strong role in the solving of this case. And yes, we solved it as a team. It was the FBI as a team that brought down Kaczynski. But I was very happy to be in charge of the language analysis back then. And I'm glad the writers for the show presented it as such in that regard. So it all sort of came together, the little aspects of idiolect and word usage and dialect features, which basically helped us put this whole thing together.
Well, Fitz, can we actually go back a little? Because you and I both know that your connection to this case actually preceded you being out in the field as an FBI agent. Remember when John Douglas presented the case to us in the FBI Academy when we were new agents in training?
I remember that very well, Jim, sitting in the room. It was an interesting sort of, and I've written this, sort of a passing of the torch, because John Douglas was retiring in June of 95, and I went through profiling training from April to June of 95. And you and I were certainly still in touch because you were, I believe you were still in New York or the Washington field office at that point. But ultimately, you had that training too. And here's John Douglas showing, just an hour presentation on the Unabomber case, which wasn't solved yet. And this was the same time frame when the letters are being written to the New York Times and the manifesto. The Unabomber wanted the manifesto to be published. So that's right as I'm graduating from profiling school. And the series did basically, that's the opening scene, or just about the opening scene. And Jim, as you and I know, there's no real graduation ceremony from the 12 weeks of profiling training. Again, dramatic license they added in there for the series, but the point was made, and lo and behold, within a few days, I was contacted by my boss and said they want a profiler out at Unabomber. Would you go? And I knew nothing really about the case except the 1 hour that John Douglas gave us in training, and of course what I read in the newspapers and the media back then. That was it. I wound up going out there. The manifesto was brand new to the New York Times. We have a copy of it. What do we do with this thing? And I got working, and eventually we got it published. And the rest, if you watch the series, is cinematic history.
Well, Fitz, I think it's really interesting that you and Jim both had a briefing on the case before you ever got involved in the case. And I know this is going to sound like a little bit of a silly question, but was there any part of you that thought to yourself when John Douglas is making that presentation, I want to be a part of this case. I wish I was investigating it myself, or I bet I could really help them solve it? Or was that just nowhere on your radar?
No, that's a good question, Francie, because I actually remember Douglas showing at that time, he probably had about 12 of the letters up on the screen. The old slides, you can hear the old click-clack of the slide projector in the back of the room. This was before PowerPoint. And I'm watching these letters. I remember, and Jim, you and I worked a number of bank robbery cases in New York City. And every once in a while, there'd be a note left at the scene. So, of course, you pick it up with gloves. You're going to send it off to the lab for fingerprints and everything else. But I'd always want to make a good photocopy of it and study the language. And some bank robbers, I got a gun, give me money, and that's it. Some of them, Jim, as you remember, would write like a half a page. All right, I'm here in the bank now, and you don't know who I am, and don't push any buttons, no funny money, and they'd go on, 100 words. And I used to love looking at those banknotes and try to analyze them and actually compare them to other banknotes from a year or two or a month or two before. And there was an early case where I actually linked a bank robber to a job that nobody had linked him to before because he wore a different mask, even held his gun in his different hand. And Jim, when you look at bank robbery pictures, is he left-handed or right-handed? Most are right-handed, but every once in a while, but can they be faking and pretending they're left-handed? But here with some unusual punctuation features, really my first linguistic analysis, and I certainly didn't call it that then, was back in the early 90s in a bank robbery case, and eventually we wound up catching that guy. I think the NYPD caught him on the streets, but we actually wound up, putting the case together with those notes. So Francis, to go back to your question, I remember looking at these letters and thinking, boy, what a bonus we have in this Unabomber case. I know very little about it, but this guy is deciding to write these long letters, and now he's going to send his article or his manifesto to the New York Times to be published. What a bonus this will be if we can get our hands on it. Boy, I wonder if somehow I can get that assigned to me back here, never thinking they'd be sending me to the Unabomber task force in San Francisco. But lo and behold, about a week after graduating from profiling school, I was on the plane to San Francisco reading the manifesto on the way out there. And that's quite frankly where I found my first big clue. And they show that well in the miniseries from the letters. And that is in the second ruse letter the Unabomber wrote in 1985 to Professor McConnell at University of Michigan. And if you watch the series or read my book, you know what I'm talking about. But there down the left-hand column is Dad, it is I. It's like hidden in the first letter of each paragraph. And no one had ever seen that before. So when the special agent in charge of the UTF, when I presented that to him, he says, "Wow, Fitz, no one's ever seen that before. How about we put you in charge of the language analysis of the case?" And from John Douglas to this earlier letter, and the rest goes on from there.
Well, Fitz, it's so interesting that you had such an early interest in linguistic profiling. I'm curious where that interest started. Have you always been interested in language?
Well, yeah, and I tried to capture this, Francie, in my 3 books, A Journey to the Center of the Mind, book 1, book 2, book 3. And really from my earliest days, because I knew where my books were going, I knew where my life had taken me. My parents never went beyond, high school, either of them, but they were intelligent, and they certainly liked to read newspapers, books, keep up on current events and certainly history. And my parents both encouraged me to, read as much as I could. At 10 years old, I read a book about the Lindbergh kidnapping. It was really like the first adult book I ever read, and there was language involved in that because the Lindbergh kidnapper, eventually Bruno Hauptmann, was identified. He wrote some notes. He left them at the scene of the kidnapping in the early 30s, and that fascinated me. My mother, early on, always enjoyed doing crossword puzzles, and she told me to play Scrabble by the time I was 10 years of age. She probably let me win a few times back there just to encourage me, but I played it all my life. I still played online on my computer. So words and language has always interested me, but you're right in that when I stepped foot at the Unabomber task force for the first time, I had a master's in psychology from a few years back, but I didn't have any formal training at all in language analysis or linguistics or anything like that. And it was definitely on the OJT, on the job training, once I got out there and said, what the heck does this mean? And I found out real quick, and we put the case together after 17 years. And lo and behold, by April of 96, Ted Kaczynski was under arrest, mostly due to his own words.
Well, Fitz, the fact that you went out there and started incorporating linguistics into a major FBI investigation, that wasn't really accepted right away, was it?
No, there were some old timers on the task force that it's it's going to be fingerprints against this guy, and hairs and fibers, and we're going to find something. And Jim, as you know, and Francie, that's all very important. And I said, and the boss kind of encouraged me to run with the language, but I was almost kind of like a far distant subsidiary of the task force for a while. But I started picking up some basic features, like I said, dotted his eye, and then eventually it was, you can't eat your cake and have it too. I was the first one when Kaczynski was identified, and we have these writings. It all wasn't coming together. Yeah, that's interesting. All right, so he uses, this word instead of that word. He spells this word in the English version of it. But it wasn't until I found in an early letter to the editor to the Saturday Evening Post, Kaczynski's mother happened to say, that I saw again, you can't eat your cake and have it too, which was on one paragraph 185 of the manifesto, when all of a sudden people said, OMG, in so many words, this language stuff may really help us get in the door. And of course, we did use a 50-page affidavit that I composed, my team and I, and all about the language comparisons. And that was attached to the search warrant request. And a federal judge hesitated at first because language, using language as a probable cause to get and search somebody's cabin. I've never, heard of this before, but I'm going to approve it. And he did, fortunately. And as we all know, it held up in the courts, a year or two later when there were motions filed to dismiss it on grounds of not being probable cause. But we got it through and everything worked there. So, and then I decided if you have a successful case in the FBI and use some innovative technique or methodology, whether you like it or not, you kind of become the expert. So I was getting more and more cases every day with language involved in threat assessment, risk management, things like that, anonymous writings, kidnapping letters, you name it. And I said, I better go back to school if I want to be taken serious in this field. So in 2000, I enrolled at Georgetown University for my second master's degree. It took me 5 years going part-time, but I finally got that. And it's after that point that I called myself a forensic linguist.
It's so interesting that you bring up the fact that this federal judge hesitated to sign the warrant. And that is an important lesson, I think, for law enforcement around the country, and has happened in, of course, other areas of the law as well, where first is not necessarily a good thing. The judiciary on the whole tends to be very conservative about granting things like probable cause. And I remember specifically when we were talking about child pornography cases, and we would have evidence that someone had downloaded child pornography, but the last known download was a year or two before. And for a long time, federal judges would routinely deny police and agents the ability to get a warrant based on what they considered to be stale information, until law enforcement learned to bring in behavioral aspects of child pornographers and to tell the judiciary what we knew from experience. And that is that child pornographers tend to keep their material for a long, long time. They never delete it. They never get rid of it. They keep it close to them for years and years. And so federal judges are now at the point where they understand that kind of behavior. And I think it's interesting because it's exactly like what happened to you, the sort of avant-garde of linguistics.
Well, yeah, and it's analogous to what you just described, Francie, that our language doesn't change all that much. Of course, we can pick up new words every once in a while, or there's additional vocabulary added to our lexicon with certain technology, whatever. But really, language will hold pretty much true over decades, depending what kind of material you're writing and in what context you're writing it. That applied too, because some of the writings we were comparing to the Unabomber, they were all written in the early to mid 90s, and we had some writings of Ted Kaczynski from the early 70s. But guess what? The topics, the context, the content, The idiolect features, and people know what that is. That's a personal dialect. If you watch the series, it all came together. So there really is no aging of language. Some minor features may change, but believe it or not, most of us have that idiolect that when we speak and when we write, we carry over these trends and traditions for sometimes decades. And depending on, again, if you're writing a scholarly journal, it's one thing. If you're writing an email to a friend, it may be something else. But within those contexts, you're still going to have a lot of similarities. And that applies to what you said about child pornography in its own way. And it certainly does with language. The federal judge in Montana realized that. And actually 5 years later, when I was authorized for the first time, when anyone was authorized for the first time, I should say, to testify in federal court to language analysis. We called it text analysis back then. There was a judge in U.S. District Court of New Jersey who allowed it in a stalker trial. And I was the first one to ever do it. And I actually opened that door. And you're both lawyers. You know the concept of precedent in the legal system. There was no precedent for the search warrant in Montana back in 96. That judge went ahead with it, and it became precedent. 4 years later in Newark, New Jersey, there was no precedent for testimony leading to this. I was the first one to do that in criminal court, and the door's been open ever since. So I really feel fortunate to have been at the vanguard of language analysis and linguistics. I'm not the only one. There are a number of scholars and academics out there who are doing work in the meantime, but I kind of came along at the right time in the courts and went from there. And it's still being used in the courts to this day.
Well, that's great. So Fitz, the fact that you had some resistance in terms of accepting linguistics as a legitimate forensic specialty in terms of being able to prove who did a particular thing at a particular time, that's kind of continued to today, hasn't it?
Well, interestingly, yes. And there's mountains and there's molehills, and this is certainly a molehill of a story, but it's one that I felt I finally had to address. And I even gave, and Jim, I think you chipped in too. There's an ex-G-Boys listserv that many retired FBI agents belong to, at least 1,000 or so. There's some on-board agents, and we just post things every once in a while. Hey, can someone tell me where this person is? Can someone tell me what the law is about this in your state? Anyway, right before the series aired on August 1st of 17, one of these guys, he posts like 3 times a day. I'm not sure what his life is like, but he has all this time on his hands. He waxes semi-eloquent at best, but he started challenging me. And I remember this guy from San Francisco. I've seen the trailers for this Manhunt miniseries, and it's a bunch of garbage, and none of it's true. It's all lies, all of it. I know who really solved it. So Jim, both you and I separately responded politely saying, hey, dramatic license kicked in. Jim Clementi was a direct part of the writing team. Other people came in and they made the Fitz character the protagonist, had him do some things he didn't. So that kind of went away. The guy contacted me online. Hey, I just like to generate conversation, whatever. But then this guy I never heard of before wrote a post, an article on this website called ticklethewire.com. And those of us who worked wiretaps know that's an old law enforcement term for like you kind of have an informant secretly say something to somebody who's going to use the phone later that day, and or overtly say something, and hopefully then you'll pick up some conversation about it. So you tickle the wire. Well, this guy jumps on August 10th on Tickle the Wire, this long article, and he pretends to be some kind of a movie and TV critic from the old Untouchables TV show to this movie Spotlight. And all of a sudden now he doesn't like the miniseries, which he's only watched one episode, but he's condemning the entire miniseries. And then he goes to condemn me. And quite frankly, I didn't care that he condemned the miniseries as his business. Everybody has likes and dislikes in media, entertainment, whatever. But then he started challenging me that I had the Fitz played no role. He was a minor player. He had nothing to do with the publication of the manifesto. And I said, whoa, let's back up here. So I talked to the PR people at Discovery because I was very active with them. And they said, hey, this isn't getting too much traction. No mainstream media. Everybody knows every movie and miniseries based on true events has dramatic license attached to it. And they have composite characters, compressed time. So I really didn't respond. I waited until the series was over and I put a post out kind of mildly correcting them. Here's some things I did. And it kind of went away. Well, just about 2 to 3 weeks ago, believe it or not, this guy wrote a second article. Here, somehow, and I don't even know if this is true, but the Unabomber somehow in prison, Ted Kaczynski, was sent his original article from Tickle the Wire. Somebody must have printed it out, sent it to Kaczynski. Kaczynski wrote this Jane Doe a letter back. And he also said he didn't like the miniseries. He spoke nothing about Jim Fitzgerald. He only spoke about the Harvard scene. There's one whole episode devoted to young Ted Kaczynski at Harvard and the psychological experiments he went through. So now Kaczynski is responding just like this guy, this retired FBI agent. Neither of them who watched the series, but both dislike it because of its lack of historical accuracy. And Jim and Francie, for the first time ever, I read an article or even talked to an FBI agent or retired FBI agent who actually bragged about a convicted serial killer who somehow supported his personal opinion about something, in this case, the alleged historical inaccuracy of a miniseries. When his second article came out in January, I said, I got to respond. So I'll tell you guys right now, and of course, your listeners, that go on ticklethewire.com, and my sort of rebuttal article is there. And I make it very clear to this former agent, now TV critic and Jim Fitzgerald critic, exactly what he got wrong. And again, I'm not trying to convince anybody. If you don't like the series, you don't like it. That's fine. But don't go condemning me, the guy who played a role in the real case and tried to get everything across 100% in the miniseries. The writer and director changed some things around. But bottom line is, go to ticklethewire.com, and my article is up there. It just went up yesterday. And you'll see we have some fun with this guy. And and just trying to just tell the real story here and not just listen to this guy's besmirching me whenever he gets a chance.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate that somebody who obviously spent time in the Bureau and knows that other people spend time in the Bureau and work their butts off and accomplish some amazing things, and to think that some Hollywood rendition, I mean, literally a fictional story based on truth, is going to accurately reflect exactly what happened and exactly how things went down. It just belies in ignorance of the process. And that's okay. And if some people want to be ignorant, that's fine. They can be ignorant. But if they actually look at the affidavit that was written and the warrant that was signed by the judge that actually got the FBI access to Ted Kaczynski, you're all over it. And to say that that's a minor role when it actually was a pivotal role and a historic change in how law enforcement could now build probable cause against a serial killer, serial bomber.
Well, the other thing about that, Jim and Fitz, is that this guy has the nerve to take the word, if it's even true, of that serial bomber, serial killer, as if somehow that guy's thoughts on a television show legitimize or delegitimize Jim Fitzgerald's life's work. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's just bizarre to have an FBI agent essentially. And I wouldn't have been surprised. This agent may have sent his article to Kaczynski himself. Who knows? And he just made up this Jane Doe. I haven't seen this letter printed anywhere else online. Maybe it's out there. Yeah, I don't want to give this guy any more, spend any more oxygen on him than there is. But if your listeners are interested, he has a couple articles out there. He quotes Ted Kaczynski, unbelievably. And next thing you know, I said, you know what, 2 times is enough. And I took a few days, put this together, and it's out there now. So, and Jim, your reference to things, I try to give a summary of how we got into the whole process. And one other thing here that I think is maybe the hidden agenda behind this author who wrote these 2 articles, he has some friends who are making a Unabomber movie. And it may be out this year, next year. You know what? I wish them luck. I hope the movie turns out to be a success and they tell the story from their version. Jim, you and I agreed early on, we're not sure how the Unabomber story can be told in an hour and 10 minutes, or maybe pushing it to an hour and 20. It's just too many moving parts. Right. 17 years, all the stuff you and I discussed, including with Discovery Channel. We were lucky when you guys pitched it. They wanted to get into the limited series genre, and it all worked out. So good luck for them. But here's now this guy, denigrating Manhunt series, and me personally. And who knows, I'm sure he'll be in love with the movie when it comes out. I'm wondering now if he's watching Waco, if he is now the self-appointed critic of every FBI-related TV show or movie that comes out. And we'll see what he does on that show, too. Maybe it's just about Unabomber and Jim Fitzgerald, though, with this guy. So we'll see.
Well, I think it would be interesting to see what they do in this movie, because I think it'll actually probably be 2 hours or 109 minutes or something like that. But it could be a longer feature. Who knows? But certainly they can't get into the details that we were able to get into in the Manhunt Unabomber series, because over the course of 8 hours, we told a lot more of the story and a lot more of the real story and a lot more of the real interactions, human interactions that happen in the course of a major investigation. So I also wish them luck. I hope the movie's a great success. And if it is a great success, I'm sure in part it will be because of the great success of Manhunt Unabomber.
And I agree. And you and I were there at the beginning of that, and we contributed to that success. And as far as the movie, that goes where it is. But sometimes, I turned my cheek the first time with this guy's August article on Tickle the Wire. But when he did it in January, it was time to the profiler strikes back. So you get a kick out of reading it, I think. And I'm not going to go back and forth with this guy. Who knows if he'll come back again? But it's case closed for me. Time to move on.
Well, thank you, Fitz. I think it was really important for you to come back and talk to our listeners about your experiences of the case, first of all, but also deal with some of this disinformation campaign that, based on what you say, it looks like the guy has, a motive, a bias, as we might call it in court, to try to impugn your credibility as a way of bolstering their own project, which is a shame. It was a 17-year investigation. There's lots of material there for people to explore and to celebrate the great work of you and the FBI in closing that case and bringing the Unabomber to justice. So congratulations again.
Yeah. And speaking of that, Francie, that 17-year investigation, that went on with no end in sight until Fitz was put on the investigation. Actually, 17-year investigation, 9 months after Fitzgerald got on the case, that case was resolved. That's a tremendous accomplishment, especially using a totally new form of investigative technique, forensic linguistics, in order to actually build probable cause of who was blowing up these bombs across the country and terrorizing the nation.
I appreciate that, Jim. It was definitely a team effort on the part of the FBI, other agents and analysts, and I'm glad that the bosses out there let me do the language analysis part of it, and that was a critical key into opening the lock on the door of the Unabomber's cabin.
Well, thank you so much, Fitz, for coming again and talking to us about Manhunt Unabomber and your part in the investigation of the Unabomber case and your part in history. We really appreciate you being part of Best Case, Worst Case.
Thank you.
Best Case, Worst Case is an XG production. Produced by Jim Clementi at Empire Studios, LA. Engineered and edited by Mike Thal. Music composed and performed by Simba Sumba. And hosted by Works.
You can listen to Best Case, Worst Case on your favorite listening app. We are on Spotify, Stitcher, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to podcasts.
Stories about child sexual abuse can make us feel powerless, but the good news is that there are organizations working to prevent abuse and keep kids safe. Darkness to Light and their Stewards of Children prevention training has trained more than 1.4 million adults to protect, recognize, and react responsibly to child sexual abuse.
But there's more work to do, and with their 4 million by 2020 goal, Darkness to Light is setting their sights on training 4 million adults around the country to keep kids safe. By donating to Darkness to Light, you can help reach this goal that will make communities across the country safer places for kids.
It starts with you. Visit www.d2l.org today to give. That's www.d2l.org.